Welcome to J Life with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today, we welcome back Professor Alon Burstein, Professor of Political Science at Tufts University. Alon, welcome.
Always great to see you, Daniel.
Amazing. So there are two versions, right? This is what I wanted to start off because I've been reading just like everybody else about this Trump Gaza plan a couple of days ago, and we'll sort of go into the ins and outs. It seems like now there are two versions of this plan that are being talked about, right? There's a sort of immediate, if you were paying attention, I forgot which night it was, Monday or Tuesday night, where Trump originally announces this. It seems, very off the cuff in terms of, okay, we're going to send out the Palestinians, send them to some neighboring country. America will take it over. And there isn't really any talk about, is that temporary? Is that permanent? Right? It's sort of, very shaky. And then 2 nights ago, Marco Rubio comes out and really delineates, what at least his reading, his interpretation of this Trump plan is. And he says, well, hey, why is everybody criticizing this? Of course, people can't live in Gaza while it's being repaired. Many of the buildings are destroyed. We're just talking about, a couple of years, and America is basically offering to help fund both the temporary relocation and the rebuilding. So I wanted to throw that to you, just even in terms of making sense of like what's on the table. Was this a shift of the narrative? Is this what Trump maybe meant the whole time? Was this a preordained, do you think Bibi had any idea this was coming, or, sort of unpack it from the beginning?
So, when the press conference happened on Tuesday night, according to at least some of the reports, Netanyahu knew broadly what was going to happen, but according to at least again some of the leaks, it was literally on their way to the press conference that Trump added the clause of, "Oh, and I'm going to say that we'll take over the Gaza Strip." Like that was something that was literally added like minutes before for Netanyahu. Netanyahu, right, very good politician. If you look at the entire press conference, all he does is just look at Trump and just smile, all smile, like just everything you say. Know that I'm on your side. I'm your best friend. That's all Netanyahu wanted in this event. Trump could have announced that Gaza is going to go completely to the Palestinians, and Netanyahu would have stood there smiling. Um, when Trump actually put this forward, this plan to, for all the purposes, carry out one of the biggest events of ethnic cleansing in at least modern history in the Gaza Strip, the way it was presented was at first Palestinians are going to leave. This is going to be funded by other states. He said it would be anywhere from 1 to 12 different locations. He claimed that lots of countries are lining up to accept the Palestinians. And he made pretty clear that the plan is a complete ethnic cleansing. He admittedly has said 1.8 million Palestinians, seemingly not knowing the exact number of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. But when he was
Which is
asked
about 2.1 million, just for
at this
you to
point,
right.
oh yeah,
Just okay.
sorry. And when he was asked how many, he said all of them, absolutely all of them. And he did make pretty clear that his idea of this is that this would be permanent. He said, first of all, the only reason the Palestinians want to be in Gaza is because they have no choice. So it's not like they have any aspirations to come back if they have another choice. One, he was asked, will they be allowed to return? And he said, I don't see why they would want to. So again, that's not saying they won't be allowed to. He said they wouldn't necessarily want to. And when he was asked who would live in the Gaza Strip, he said the peoples of the world, i.e., not is going to go back to the Palestinians, the people of the world. He was then asked, Palestinians also, and he said, yeah, sure, Palestinians also. But clearly, this is not going to be returned, in his vision, at least on Tuesday night, to Palestinians to be some sort of future Palestinian entity, whatever we want to call it. Now, what happened since then is that a lot of the White House staff and different people in the administration have tried to scale this back because not only did they not know of this plan, according to the White House spokesperson, she was asked, "Is there a concrete plan?" And she said, "Well, we started working on it the minute the president said it." So that means there was no plan in advance. The president said it, and then the staff started to work on it. And both she and Marco Rubio and lots of others have been trying to scale it back for several reasons. First of all, there's a lot of anger within the sort of Republican guard saying, "Wait a minute, you're going to send U.S. troops. The whole idea is to stop having war, stop having the United States involved. The same week, you're completely defunding U.S. aid because why should we be involved in the world? But now you're going to take over the Gaza Strip." So first of all, they're trying to scale back. Will this be U.S. troops or not? And now, since then, Trump has put out statements saying that apparently the new version is after Israel finishes the war, then Israel's going to hand this territory over to the United States. It's not going to, and there'll be no U.S. troops. So at that point, I don't know, maybe there'll be no troops and the Palestinians will willfully leave. I don't know what the idea is there. And then others have tried to scale it back also in terms of, is this permanent? Is this temporary? Is this that? But it's all just attempts to try to scale back because really, despite how decisively Trump said it, it has been fully admitted in the White House that there is no concrete plan yet. So now they're trying to quickly reshape the plan as something that maybe is either more presentable, more feasible, will piss less people off, or something like that. That's sort of the scale back that we're seeing from the different actors within the administration, I would say.
Yeah, so we were talking on the phone a couple days ago. I wanted to just get your like immediate gut thoughts, and sort of my initial read of this is that there's three options. I'm very partial to the third, but I'll just lay out the other two. If you think of any other ones, just let me know. Right, the first is that this is a well thought out plan. Trump is serious. He's being literal. This is maybe something him and Bibi worked out, or something that he's actually critically thought about and came into this with, a game plan. It doesn't really seem like that's the case because of everything that you've just delineated before. The second is that this is just totally off the cuff. Trump, I don't think he's coming in with well-prepared notes that he's, reading off of. And so he's at a press conference and somebody asks and he's like, I don't know, maybe we'll do this. And then, everybody takes it seriously as, an actual policy when, it's just sort of Trump style, whether one thinks it's awful or great, right? And there are obviously people that fall into both of those. It's just Trump style to spitball. Maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. And so everyone's taking this as like a serious policy proposal. The last one that seems the most reasonable is this is just classic hardline Trump, but also very Middle Eastern negotiation style in the sense of, even, I was talking to actually a professor at UCI, I won't say who, and I was talking to them about this the day after, and they were like, it's when you're in Israel and you're in the shuk, right, the open marketplace, and you walk by and someone says, I'm going to give you the best price, in the entire market, and then you look and everyone is selling the exact same thing for the exact same price. That Trump is more just creating, a super hardline policy in order that then when he actually goes and perhaps does some deal with Saudi Arabia, other stuff that we might get into, it actually seems like Trump compromised a lot. And so he'll then ask the other side to talk about a lot. I mean, do you see that being the best read? And if so, is this another classic case of, almost the split screen reality of, how the West understands the Middle East and how the Middle East actually functions?
So I'll say, first of all, when it comes to the first options, is this a well-developed plan or not? So like I said, clearly there's no well-developed plan. One of the things that was very, very conspicuously absent from both Netanyahu and Trump discussing how apparently during Trump's first term he brought peace to the Middle East, and the entire region was secure and all went bad in the last 4 years, and Netanyahu confirming this and all that. What was very absent was the word Hamas. The word Hamas didn't really appear in their statements. The plan, again, Israel's now been fighting, the most intensive war that it has basically had. 15 months. Hamas is far from defeated. I just actually recorded the video I want to upload to my YouTube channel about the current status of Hamas. So therefore, the idea that there is a plan, this is going to happen without considering, meanwhile, there's a militant group that you haven't defeated in 15 months of very harsh fighting. What's going to happen with them? No, there is no, that's in terms of option
Was
one.
this
There was
presumably, sorry to cut you off, the initial or even the Marco Rubio sort of, I guess, plan 2.0? Was this assuming that this is being done in partnership with Hamas, that, a part of the ceasefire deal is Hamas agreeing to this? Like, was that a prereq, or was it actually that either Trump is going to let the IDF, finish the job or actually send in American troops? Or is that just,
it hasn't been
unanswered?
mentioned.
Okay.
It's unanswered. It's this is going to happen. Hamas is clearly not going to agree to this. But we could talk about later the prospects of Palestinians agreeing to this, which most nations don't agree to their own ethnic cleansing. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen to them, but usually they don't. However, I don't think that there was any real plan put in place. In terms of was this just off the cuff, I don't think so either. One of the interesting things when it came to this plan is, first of all, Trump was reading. He was reading notes when he said that Palestinians are going to be evicted from the Gaza Strip, that the United States is going to take it over. This wasn't the way you characterized it, which is much more common. Trump gets a question and, oh, I don't know, that'll happen. This was at least written out. And more importantly, it was rumored. It was already rumored a week or two before that this might happen, which means the staff at the White House was already circulating these ideas. So it, at the same time, wasn't just an idea that came up at that moment. Now, is this Trump's classic style bullying, classic style to Colombia sending back planes of illegal immigrants? Oh, okay, we'll put 25% tariffs. Oh, you'll take them? Okay, we won't. Canada, we'll put 25% tariffs. I mean, that is the biggest thing. But 25% tariffs, and then Canada agreeing to implement a plan that basically it had already agreed to under the Biden administration. There's nothing new that Trump achieved here, but he could show that through my bullying, they agreed that we're going to do. Is he hoping to achieve through the same bullying tactic here to have Arab nations jump in and say, no, 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 wait. Don't do that. Don't do that. Here's all we're willing to do, so you won't do that. I think that probably is his hope. I think his hope is that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and others are all going to jump in and say, look, we are willing to give billions upon billions of dollars, and we'll even assume responsibility for the Gaza Strip, something that, again, is not new. It's something that Biden proposed long ago, but trying to like force them into actually doing that, in order for Trump to say, okay, well, if that's the case, then we can back off. Yes, I do think that Trump is probably counting on that outcome. One thing I will say is what he's not taking into consideration, in my opinion, is the fact that while possibly he's looking at this purely as rhetoric, now possibly not, possibly he really does think that, again, people will volunteer to be ethnically cleansed, and somehow Gaza is going to become the Riviera. It's going to become the new place of American expansion or building. Riviera in the Middle East. I don't know what exactly. Possibly he's thinking that, or he's maybe thinking it's just rhetoric. Us and a lot of people in the world probably would be assuming it's just rhetoric. What I think he's not factoring in is that in Israel, this is not being seen or received as just rhetoric. Even if Netanyahu knows that this may likely not happen, nonetheless, first of all, opinion poll that was done in Israel 2 days ago shows 72% of the country is in favor of such a plan for the Gaza Strip.
But it's unclear. So I was looking at this. This is the Jewish People Policy Institute, that just, they asked, a couple questions. It was about 40% saying that they were, that they wanted it. Another 32, I think, that said that they think it's unrealistic, but, desirable in some way. But even when I was digging into that, because I was reading that, I was going to ask you about it in the next question, it was unclear exactly which version was presented to them, right? Like this is why I started with this, because it's very unclear. I mean, does the average Israeli, because if it's spun the way, I listened to the whole Marco Rubio press conference, and everything he said there was essentially correct. I mean, he listed a couple of things. He said, Gaza is going to be inhospitable for the next couple of years. It's going to need major international investments. If America should help with this, right? This is a very non-isolationist thing to say. So if you're just hearing this for the first time with Marco Rubio, it seems like yes, yes, yes. Okay, let's create a situation where, one, you can rebuild Gaza, create a habitable place. You get Hamas out, get some international communities in. So I'm wondering, I mean, or do you think the average Israeli is going around saying like, gee, it'd be really nice if like these 2 million Palestinians just disappeared and never came back? Like, I mean, there's probably some split there.
But the Marco Rubio version is equally not a realistic version. No place in history have 2 million people that are stateless without any repatriation capability been, again, cleansed from an area, the area rebuilt for them and then welcomed back. That's never happened. There's no such thing as that happening. There's no prospect for that happening for the all the years of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and certainly in the times that Israel has controlled the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Palestinians are not allowed back as is now. So the idea that with the current government or current trends in Israel, the idea that Palestinians with absolutely no claim, no passport, no travel papers, no anything, are going to somehow be evicted and come back, I don't think that anyone who's answering a poll on that thinks realistically, but they'll be allowed back in a few years. Somehow the United States canceling US aid, but is going to invest billions of dollars in order to build the Gaza Strip and then welcome Palestinians back to what? To Israeli occupation, to a siege, to their own state. Like, I don't think that in either version, I don't think there's a big difference, because the only...
Well, it would be an international, because only because the answer to, whatever is going to happen, even, whether the Palestinians are there or not, right? Like, I mean, I'm imagining if in a year from now we're talking, and you're coming back onto the podcast and the situation has reset to a pre-October 7th where Hamas is still in power, and, it just sort of, the same as all other Israel-Gaza wars. I don't think that's desirable for anyone, right? It's not desirable for Israel, not desirable for the Palestinians.
I'm not saying that there's an alternative is desirable. What I'm saying is between the realistic or unrealistic version of Trump's plan and the realistic or unrealistic version of Marco Rubio's plan, when what you're saying, the average Israeli was asked, well, does this matter? Like which version of the plan were presented? I don't think it matters because with both those plans, the only operative thing that's being presented is the, you know, cleansing, expulsion, whatever, of all Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. Then that somehow the United States is going to rebuild it, is going to come back. That yeah is up for question. But either way, that is the initial phase of that. And what I was saying before, in terms of Trump not necessarily factoring in the fact that while this may be seen as just rhetoric, and while again the leaders of Arab states have dealt with Trump before, they're not dumb either. They know exactly, okay, so we have to come up with a plan now in order to try to bring him back from this and etc. Meanwhile, in Israel, this is being taken seriously. And whether or not Trump actually thinks this is going to go through, it is going to have an effect on the ground. Itamar Ben-Gvir, former Minister of National Security, has already put forth a law saying Israel is going to encourage the quote willful immigration of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And Netanyahu and his coalition are going to have a problem now. You're going to resist that, but you're in favor of Trump's plan. And Netanyahu is very scared of being seen as not in favor of Trump's plan because it does have popular support in Israel.
Well, that's, I mean, it
At
does
the
seem
same
like
time,
I
there's the
actually haven't
general's
read.
plan. Hang on. At the same time, there's the general's plan that was seemingly being implemented in northern Gaza to clear the area and annex it to Israel. Now, with the ceasefire on truce, that has not been developed, but the operational plans are there. The Minister of Defense in Israel already instructed the IDF to begin operational plans for the mass evacuation or expulsion or whatever of Palestinians. So while this may be at the level of rhetoric and is going to come true or not come true, I don't think that they're factoring in that in Israel the plans are going to be developed such that even if in the end Arab states come back and they come up with a plan, Trump agrees, etc., that's all well and good. But the hard right and very hawkish government in Israel is already going to be implementing possibly a different plan based just upon this rhetoric, and I think that Trump has not factored that in.
Got it. Okay, so just to sort of summarize, so even if Trump is sort of playing, the 3D chess or whatever, and he realizes this is not practical, this is never going to happen, both politically, morally, financially, in terms of what the US is actually willing to commit. And he's just saying this is some bargaining chip so that in half a year from now, he meets with, the head of Saudi Arabia, and basically Saudi Arabia can almost look like the good guys who convinced Trump out of this in exchange for them helping out with the situation. There are many, especially on the Israeli right, that are actually seeing this as, an actual policy proposal. And these might actually come to loggerheads at some point, in a couple months of, the people in Israel that are taking this seriously, and Trump, who just sort of, threw this out. That will be quite the interesting clash. So that will happen. For someone that, because Ben-Gvir is talking about willful immigration. I mean, is there a difference, politically, morally? I mean, willful immigration, if Israel does, offer financial incentive for people leaving, now someone can still say, well, that's a little bit unethical, but that's obviously very different than, having the army come through and everyone needs to leave the village by 6 p.m.
So, we can discuss morality from lots of different directions. I'll say from the perspective of international law, first of all, there's no clear definition of ethnic cleansing, right? There's like 4 major categories of crimes. International crimes is genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. All of those have exact definitions. Ethnic cleansing does not. Ethnic cleansing does not have an exact definition in the ICC or the ICJ, and instead it's sort of an ad hoc definition each time that the court sits to discuss ethnic cleansing. So what does it include? Varies. And yeah, if you bomb an area back to the Stone Age, justified or not justified, if you bomb an area back to the Stone Age and then say, well, listen, it's uninhabitable, so I'm not going to kick the people out, but I'm going to offer them money to leave, is that different than if you kick them out? Again, that morally, there's questions here. By international law standards, it's hard to say if that would be considered the same level of ethnic cleansing as if you come with bulldozers and just push the people out. I will say that within the list of war crimes, creating unlivable conditions is considered a war crime that is tantamount to mass expulsion. So, again, morally we can debate if maybe it's more moral, less moral, etc. So from the perspective of international law, while ethnic cleansing itself, maybe Trump's plan is, and maybe Ben-Gvir's plan, you'd have a harder time cementing that in court. The war crime of like creating a situation, right? This didn't just happen. Creating a situation where the place is unlivable and then saying, well, it's unlivable, so I'm going to offer you compensation to leave. But it's not just to leave. Again, it's to leave and not come back. And you have to leave. And if you're a minor and this was signed in your name, you still don't have the right to come back. So like all those things within Ben Gvir's proposed law um, have to be factored in. Is it more moral or not? Yeah, obviously, I would say it's more moral to offer people an opportunity to leave instead of to expel them. But within context of, again, create, if we're going to say that the Gaza Strip is now an unlivable situation created as a result of this, so to facilitate and creating that and then say, well, it's unlivable, let me offer you to leave, that also has to be taken into consideration when it comes to evaluating the morality.
Sure. I'm almost more interested in the moral component than the legal component. You're going to hate that because you don't want to discuss morals, which are in some way
A
a lot more
rabbi and an
trivial.
academic sit down for a talk,
No,
yeah.
but I'm saying, but even what you said before about the international law of ethnic cleansing, it's also subjective in some way. So I think, just like morality, it is sort of a bunch of people sitting around trying to figure out, well, exactly what this is. I'm only struck by the moral question, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And, like many people, I imagine like most Israelis or even most American Jews, my gut reaction to this obviously is, Trump is, a crazy person and just sort of sprouting nonsense. And so, I didn't take this literally, but, you take it seriously, but not literally, same thing, Maimonides says about Midrash, for listeners that are wondering where the Jewish component comes in here. But then I'm struck by, one of the more powerful essays that I've ever read. I think I might have even brought this up on a past podcast with you. Amos Oz, obviously the very, liberal Israeli novelist. He never won the Nobel Prize, but I think he won the second to the Nobel Prize, whatever that is. Some, English major can comment on the video here and tell us, he has this really interesting essay where he talks about how because of the what he calls the Ziddishness, but the diasporic Jewish mentality that in 1948, Israel actually didn't ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, just like every other Western country does. And he sort of runs the counterfactual. Now, I don't know if this is him making a serious moral argument, a historical argument, him just ranting and having a bad day. It's unclear, but still to this day, I always actually use it in conversations about Israel because it's very provocative, where he basically says, okay, if we were to isolate the ethics of ethnic cleansing being done in 1948, it would have been bad. But if you run the counterfactual and think of what's happened the last 75 years for Palestinians that are either in Israeli cities or probably the better case is even Palestinians in the West Bank, Amos Oz and I think Benny Morris, the Israeli historian who used to be on the left in the 90s, seemed to have flipped to the right in recent years. He makes a similar argument of how it actually would have been from a utilitarian perspective, more moral in some abstract sense, because you wouldn't have had the ongoing situation with occupation and then, people who don't have, equal rights and all this, regardless of whose fault it is. I'm wondering, and again, you don't have to answer this question, but, the question that keeps popping up to me, especially as I read a lot of people on the, Israeli side that are writing articles after articles about how great this would be, if in 50 years our grandchildren are going to be sitting around saying, okay, obviously it would have been immoral in 2025 if they did that, but if they did it, then there wouldn't be, insert new terrorist group that's, our grandchildren are, spending time on podcasts talking about when they both inherit our podcast. I mean, I'm wondering, not that you can really think like that, because that can actually justify some awful things. The other thing I want to say about ethics before I pass this to you, utilitarianism isn't actually always the best way to measure ethics, right? I think the most famous, example of that is from a utilitarian perspective. It is moral in some way for me to kill you if I can donate 5 of your organs to 5 people who are going to die without it. Yet probably none of us would want to live in a universe where every week someone randomly gets killed to donate their organs. So I don't even think utilitarianism necessarily is the way to go. But this argument sort of, I always have, one of the, either the angel or the devil, I guess, depending on if you're more right wing or left wing popping up. I'm wondering, I mean, do you consider this at all? And just thinking of like, kind of almost like what else? Like, what is the alternative if something drastic doesn't happen? Again, this isn't a defense. This is just a, I don't know, hands to the air, imagining.
So I'll say a couple of things. First of all, when it comes to looking at the war of 1948, 1949, and there was a lot of ethnic cleansing, again, that was done on both sides. At that time, the idea that if it would have been completed, then we would not be in the current situation is wrong. Because the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which is the area that is under Israeli occupation, and the area within which the PLO, Fatah, the Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, where most of the fighting happens, um, are actually inhabited by Palestinians that did go through that process of the cleansing, mass expulsion, running away, fleeing, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of controversy, and the truth is, it's all correct. In some areas, they were driven out. In some areas, they were either executed or forced to flee, and in some areas, they just ran away on their own volition to avoid war. It's all correct. You could always find a case saying, "Well, this is what happened. This is what happened." All of it happened. Same thing happened to the Jewish populations in the different areas in Arab countries. Some of them fled on their own volition. Some of them were kicked out. Some of them were given the choice, be executed or flee. Either way, the finish the job, so to speak, within Israel, within the area that became Israel, that is what drove a lot of Palestinians to the refugee camps in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So what I was also more talking about, I think, I mean, I don't exactly remember the specific thing, is more internal Arab Palestinian Israelis, and the questions of their equality or citizenship or things like that. I don't know. But again, finishing the job with, unless what you're talking about is, setting up gas chambers and making sure that Palestinians don't exist anymore, like finishing the job, so to speak, wouldn't have actually had anything to do with resolving this current situation. Now, in terms of the morality of like in the height of war, is it not better to allow war to play out and have ethnic cleansing in order to like have peace come back afterwards? So there is an actually like a scholarly direction that embraces this. The article was written in 1999. It's called "Give War a Chance," that essentially says that like by the now international impetus to stop ongoing conflicts, like in Syria, like make sure you impose a no-fly zone, make sure that actually prolongs the civil war for another 5-6 years, and many more people die rather than if you let someone win. I will say though, it's a dangerous game to play. Similarly, Hitler should have finished the job. No Jews, no Zionism, no
No,
Israel,
but see,
and therefore
that's
no Middle East conflict. Like it's
well, only, and I guess I can't help but play devil's advocate with you. So I'm not actually defending this policy, but just on the Hitler thing. I mean, if Hitler would have offered people to leave, that would have been taken, right? Like every
what's the
Jew
difference?
in
I'm saying if what you're saying is from a utilitarian perspective,
no, sorry, I'm saying from a
resolve the
utilitarian
conflict
perspective.
resolve
No,
the conflict in the Middle East.
no,
Um,
even of the local population, meaning, Benny Morris's argument, if I understand it correctly, is for the Palestinians, it actually would have been better long term if in 48 and then again 67 they were pushed into a different country and actually had, the Benny Morris's point is the precise problem now is there's always been an opening that's been just enough to have international efforts that either are trying to help the Palestinians or more often just hate Israel to actually try to fund and foment this sort of either internal battle, Israeli Palestinians, or external battle, Israeli versus the wider Middle East. So if there was no opening, it would be a lot harder for those forces to actually get in there. So it's like precisely the right amount of opening to allow a conflict to become exacerbated, right? I think in the Hitler example, it's not, obviously if you kill everyone, that of course is not good for them. But from a utilitarian perspective, right, if you could run the counterfactual and if the Nuremberg laws said all Jews get kicked out tomorrow, that would have certainly been good. I mean, obviously, history, you can't really read history with counterfactuals, but there are
but
times
again,
in
you could play the game from all directions. Okay, then it probably would have resulted in a lot of less Israelis being killed if Israel would have been destroyed in 1948. That would have also resulted in a lot less Israelis and Jews being killed, because throughout the world there hasn't been another major genocide of Jews. As we know, the largest day that Jews died since then is October 7th. So if Israel would have just lost the war in 1948, when the amount of Jews in the world that were in Israel were a vast minority, so that would have been good too. That's also a way to go. If you're
yeah,
going
no,
to run the game,
this seems like
then
a 3 a.m.
then
drunken conversation. No, I mean
no,
it
say
is
if
no,
if you're going to run the game, and this is where there's a lot of difficulty, in my opinion, with grand proposals of ethnic cleansing, but the way it's sort of being discussed as well, but Gaza is really uninhabitable in this. Yeah, sure. So was Germany after World War II. Yet you didn't really suggest so evict all the Germans in the world, and morally Germans, Nazi Germans, also not exactly the best people at that moment. But evict all of them, and send them to Somalia, send them to Uganda, send them to whatever. That's we'll build them a nice city, to quote Trump. We'll build them a nice city and they'll live out their lives there. Yeah, Germany was destroyed, but that wasn't what you did. Japan was nuked. Yeah, but that wasn't what you did. The idea that like when it's Palestinians, okay, you can just say, well, maybe this will be better for them. Coming from this like a Western perspective, like looking at that, so I just like to throw it back. Yeah, probably better for Israelis also if Israel would have just been destroyed. Been better for Jews worldwide. You could play that game too.
That I
Like,
think is like the Jews worldwide, I think, is a harder argument. I mean, you had the Soviet Jewry, you had, Jews in the Arab world, which I don't think it's just because of Israel. Either way, I mean, I think this is
well,
a,
historically,
you know,
that is a fact. Jews in the Arab world did not suffer anything near the anti-Semitism that Jews in the Christian world suffered. And a lot of the clashes that emerged as a result of Zionism, yeah, if Israel was destroyed, counterfactual, possibly they would have gone back to living their lives. I don't know. What I'm saying
yeah,
is
I would I
that
would I would be skeptical. I mean, you're definitely right about
I'd
the
also be
Christian being
skeptical
worse.
that if we
Yeah.
just evacuated all Palestinians and shoved them into Sinai in 48, they'd live a better life. But I'm saying, like, if we're playing the counterfactual and saying maybe this would have been better for them, you have to be willing to play that, maybe turn that on to our side too, so to speak. Like that's a game that has to be played. But the big issue of saying like, maybe they would have been better off. Okay, but again, you didn't suggest that for Germans. You didn't suggest that for lots of other situations and countries that their places became inhospitable
Yeah, I mean,
as a
I
result of war.
no, I actually wonder. I don't know this, but was there? I mean, I obviously neither of us were around, and I haven't really read any articles about this. What were? I mean, it must have actually seemed a lot more difficult to figure out what to do with Germany post World War II in terms of like just rebooting all of it. It's politics, it's economy, it's stage on the world,
Right. I
the
mean,
world stage. I mean,
it's
what were actually those conversations that were happening? And yeah,
it's obviously a much longer conversation than we're going to have now, but it involved massive investment. There's a Marshall Plan that was focused on all of Europe and rebuilding Europe. Germany itself, it's very hard to talk about Germany because Germany was split between West Germany, East Germany, and
sure.
Berlin was even split between West Berlin and East Berlin. In East Germany's whole other question, right? It was a whole process
Yeah,
of
that's until the 90s. Yeah,
making the area a Soviet state. And in West Germany, not only was there massive investment of the United States and the world, but it was also, first of all, direct occupation, and the area was divided among the different Allied powers. And there also were massive re-education programs and platforms and cultural things and changing the laws, reintroducing a new constitution. It's by sheer coincidence, the German constitution also begins, I believe, with "We the People," et cetera, et cetera. I think that that's true. I think I read this somewhere. I'm not sure. I don't speak German.
yeah.
But like,
I was gonna say probably not exactly "we the people," probably some other words there. But no, I'm only so it is interesting to dig in because just spitballing here. I mean I'm curious to hear if you would disagree to this. If some international coalition tried doing some contemporary Marshall Plan in Gaza, people would also say that's ethnic cleansing, right? Like bringing in allied powers and re-education and all, like that would also be considered that. So I'm only, I guess one of the problems is that nobody really has, right? Like the Biden Harris administration seemed to just have no solution, right? I mean, maybe it was better than what Trump is proposing, but I think where a lot of people are right now is just like, what is, and this is also, of course, a good amount of blame is on Bibi, just like a lot of other things, right? He also sort of really had no, I remember we were talking over a year ago and like, okay, well, what is the plan for the day after? It seems like maybe we're in the day after. Again, unclear, if the ceasefire is a forever ceasefire or, just until a couple weeks from now. But it just, yeah, there's a shocking absence of different potential options short of anything like this, because it seems like the Marshall Plan was just as drastic in terms of getting all this international investment within. So I don't know if this is a question that people are actually like struggling with right now.
so in terms of the fact that the Biden Harris administration didn't have a better solution, I mean, thus far this deal that the was very 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 big on smiling and crediting Trump. The deal is the Biden deal, 100%. Like it's actually shocking to see that the entire negotiations that happened, in January was just an annex to how to adjust that deal, and it even says this is an annex in order to implement the deal from May of 2024. And the annex is just about like updating the deal in terms of fact that more hostages have been killed since then, and et cetera, et cetera. And the IDF has taken over more territory and things like that. And looking at the mechanisms of what days people will be released and so on. Phase 2 of the deal does involve complete IDF withdrawal, and phase 3 does involve massive international investment, removing the siege on Gaza, and Gaza being rebuilt. What it does explicitly avoid is exactly what you were hinting at: under whose administration and who actually does this. Is
Well,
this under Israeli
but
hang on, is this under
yeah.
Israeli occupation? Is this under Hamas? Is this under Palestinian Authority? Right, absolutely. It does not go into that question simply because you could not get Israel and Hamas to agree to that. You cannot get Israel to agree that it'll be Hamas. You cannot get Hamas to agree to be someone else. So leave it vague, right? This is a trick that has worked in the world in different places. In the Israel-Palestinian case, less of leave it vague, let the sides to come together and then figure it out later. You know, ultimately, though, the big difference when you're saying, like, if there was some sort of international coalition coming in and trying to like invest and rebuild in the Gaza Strip, the big difference is that in West Germany, this was done, first of all, with cultural sensitivity to Germany and Germans. This wasn't done in a way that, again, the re-education programs that were introduced were specifically about Nazism, not about, like, German versions of history and etc. But more than that, there is the fact that this was done again in West Germany, also within the context of the Cold War and trying to like show up to East Germany and etc. This was done within the idea of rebuilding a Germany. Now, there is no such thing as rebuilding a Gaza. Gaza, since the Strip became the Gaza Strip in 1948, it has been under either Egyptian occupation from 48 to 67, then Israeli direct occupation from 67 to 2005, then under a siege and controlled by Hamas from 2006, essentially, or more accurately 2007, until now. So the idea that you're just going to rebuild it, again, this sort of like almost seemingly Trump idea that if you just rebuild high-rise buildings, everyone just wants money. I mean, Trump tried that with the deal of the century. Turns out that people aren't willing to give up their nationalist aspirations for money. But the idea that you're just going to do that, that you're right, is not going to be seen necessarily as a plan, as something that's actually for the good of the population. I don't think it'll be considered ethnic cleansing unless you have to kick the people out. But it's going to be seen as imposing something else, and for what? So from the Palestinian side, this has to be within the framework of, and then Gaza, along with the West Bank, becomes a Palestinian state. From the Israeli side, it used to be that that would be a possibility if there was some sort of guaranteed security. You're going back to Oslo, the fact that it'll be demilitarized, the fact that there'll be cooperation of security, and Israel will have overarching security control and something to say about border control, et cetera, et cetera. Today, it would be a lot harder to actually get the Israeli side to agree that that'll be part of a framework towards a Palestinian state, regardless of what sort of security safeties are put in place. So that, I think, is more where you're stuck in terms of like figuring out, okay, if you get this investment, which you could get, if you get this investment and if you get these plans, okay, but how do you come up with something that on the one hand is going to give the Palestinians an avenue to cooperate with this because this will get you somewhere, but also give Israelis an avenue to cooperate with this and still feel like they are feeling secure.
Yeah. No, because
with that, you also
the worst of all options, I think, for everyone is if Hamas stayed in power and then got all these international investments, which would just allow them to rebuild a militarized Gaza Strip, right? That would be the worst for Israelis, for whatever foreign investment dollars go into this for the Palestinians.
Which is the current situation. Currently, Hamas is the only governing apparatus in Gaza. Israel did not put any other apparatus in place. The Palestinian Authority, it was suggested would come in, Israel and others rejected that, such that every time Israel evacuated from Gaza City or from Han Yunis or from other places, the only governing apparatus is Hamas. So the police officers that come out of hiding are Hamas. The mayors come out of hiding are Hamas. So, as part of the ongoing hostage deal right now, bulldozers and tractors and heavy industrial equipment is being brought in order to start clearing rubble. This is being handed over to the Hamas bureaucrats because there's no other governing apparatus there. These are the same bulldozers that were used in the October 7th attack. So what do you do?
But this is but this is the exact point, right? Like, so there's all this material, right? So like, okay, the two big international, at least from my observation, right? So you had this ridiculous port that was built for $50 million in Gaza that seemed to have broken apart when a 2-foot wave came in, right? So this port effectively
did it did function for a month and a half. Yeah, it was
okay.
It was not the saving grace of northern Gaza.
Yes. And then now
but it
you
was
do
more than a
have,
stupid wave.
yeah, now you do have people that are, I think, for themselves, either countries or NGOs that, genuinely want to help and they're sending money and resources. But the question is, these resources, even the same thing with a lot of the food and aid, where Hamas was sort of just taking it for themselves and everything. So that's sort of where I think the stuck is happening. So I don't think, population transfer is the answer, but it does seem like there is some out of box thinking required, which is just to get back to the original question. And maybe we can, just talk a little bit about potentially Saudi Arabia's role in here. I mean, it really does seem like America and, because America doesn't want to send in any troops, but because they sort of have this, carrot of, increased cooperation with Saudi Arabia and everything like that, Saudi needs to seem in some way like the good guys. Saudi's also willing to be, the bad guys in a way that America probably doesn't want to be, so it sort of seems like the only actually realistic option as opposed to status quo. Status quo is probably the most realistic. If I was a betting person, I would say in a year from now, we are in the same situation. Hamas is in power. And Hamas has already started rebuilding tunnels and, they're probably, recruiting as many young Gazans as they possibly can into Hamas. And so, status quo, I think Hamas is growing. Hamas is going to have more money. Hamas is going to have more weapons. And then maybe in 2027 or 2028, we're looking at another version of what we just saw for the last year. And then, rinse and repeat. If we don't want that to happen, which I think would be the worst for, everyone, the second most realistic option is probably this coalition of countries that are actually going to come in and basically, again, force the Hamas out of power in some way. Again, unclear who, because they're probably not going to go away off their own volition. And so you're still stuck in some way. And so, I don't think Israel is gonna, I don't know if you're predicting that Israel is actually going to go back into Gaza in the next couple of months, but in some way we're stuck. And there needs to be someone critically thinking about this in a way that, I mean, I'm sure there are individuals critically thinking about it, but it just seems like there are no good options. I was actually talking a couple, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to this, but East Jerusalem Palestinian activist Summaries, who writes for The Atlantic. So I had him on my podcast a couple of months ago at this point, and he wrote an article for Haaretz actually the week before I talked to him. This was far before this current Trump announcement. This was back during the Saudi deal, but he wrote an op-ed called, give Trump a chance to, for peace in Israel and Palestine. And so, you do have people that are saying like, okay, well, we need, almost any solution is better than status quo, because status quo right now for Palestinians in Gaza is terrible. And so obviously worse than that would be forced population transfer from the Israeli American or another government. But like there is somewhere ethically in between the keep the status quo all the way to forced population transfer, right? Like, there has to be something in the middle there that is actually closer to the answer, both politically and morally. I don't know if you have anything to add there, but it just seems like, I was shocked by, so many people, Trump announces it. And even after Marco Rubio, 2.0 dub it, I understand why everybody's knee-jerk reaction is this is awful, this is terrible, this needs to be condemned. And yes, I will add my name to that list. I will not, would not vote for this or whatever by any stretch of the imagination. But what I don't hear is anybody actually saying a sensible plan. Like it just seems like, we're just going to go back to status quo. And this is what I think is upsetting so many Israelis and why I think you have these, 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 Israelis that are saying like, yes, give us anything but status quo. And so this is, a big question. I think until that question is answered, I think politically this is going to have huge consequences because we're already seeing the Israeli right, far right, grow in popularity. And I don't think all of that is just a knee-jerk, reaction to October 7th. I think also some of it is even Bibi Netanyahu, who represents, center-right, he who said, we're going to finish the job and we're going to make sure that Hamas is not gone, like, he was sort of pushed into, or bullied, to use our term from before, by Trump into accepting this deal. So now we're creating, or it is being created, a major swath in the Israeli right that's significantly more right than Bibi Netanyahu is going to be a centrist in a year from now if you just take his policies, because there are all these people saying like, okay, well, what is happening? It just seems like no one's actually willing to get this done. So we're looking at a prime minister, Bezalel Smotrich, maybe in, the next election. And I don't think that's too hyperbolic in terms of the direction that things are going. And then of course, that's only going to radicalize, Hamas more. And so it just seems like, again, this is why I go back to that utilitarian, I don't actually think this is a good idea, but like I am looking into the future in some sense in 10 years from now, and the situation could get much worse, right? Like people think, oh, it's been really bad. Like one could envision in all sorts of ways it getting worse. So that's sort of what's been eating at me, I think.
Um, the fact is that there have been coalitions of Arab countries, from Jordan to the United Arab Emirates to even Qatar at some point, to Saudi Arabia, all of whom did propose either to assume some responsibility for the Gaza Strip or to come in as a coalition into the Gaza Strip. So there have been other outside the box ideas. Egypt did not agree to be one of them, but there have been outside the box ideas. The Palestinian Authority said it would not come in as a puppet government in the Gaza Strip just in order to be like, sort of under Israel in the same way as the West Bank. It would come in if this would be part of envisioning, an actual irreversible roadmap towards a Palestinian state. Those are also outside the box thoughts. Would that be better or worse? Would that end the war? Would that bring that? I don't know. But there have been, again, this coalition of Arab countries have been proposing it time and again throughout the war. I've said, like, we are willing to go in and assume responsibility. One of the factors that we're overlooking is that for both Israel or the Israeli government, I'll say, and Hamas, the status quo is beneficial. And that's part of the problem, right? The Israeli hard right contains in it people like Bezalel Smotrich, who in 2016 openly said Hamas is an asset because Hamas is, as long as we have Hamas there, then the world is not going to force us into a Palestinian state. In 2017, the Palestinian Authority tried to strangle Hamas and cut off all of the funding to bureaucrats in the Gaza Strip. And in turn, Netanyahu and his administration went to Qatar and brokered a deal to transfer hundreds of millions of dollars monthly to Hamas through Israel in order to keep Hamas alive instead of letting it fall. Why? Because the status quo was politically beneficial. Similarly, for Hamas, the status quo is politically beneficial. It is beneficial to have this amount of death and carnage in the Gaza Strip, because if the movement manages to survive it, then not only they're the only government apparatus, but the population is highly radicalized. They're going to be more inclined to hate Israel as opposed to saying let's make peace, and they're going to be responsible, as you said, for all the aid coming in. So the fact that no one is willing to think outside the box is incorrect. There are actors that are willing to think outside the box. The two main actors that have refused thus far to think outside the box of a solution are the Israeli government and Hamas, that have shot down every outside the box thinking. So it's not as though we have arrived in February of 2025 and no one has proposed anything, so Trump is now thinking outside the box. No, lots of people have proposed radical ideas also in terms of how to get this done. They have been rejected by the actors that, despite the absolute heavy losses that they have endured, and despite the criticism that they legitimately should be facing from their respective populations for bringing them to here, are actually counting on benefiting from this. And with that, we also have the hard right that is not just enjoying the status quo, but is seeing it further, right? There's operational plans of Smotrich and Ben Gvir and large parts of the Likud also. The head of the conglomerate of members of the Knesset that are for Greater Israel, that's a way of saying for having settlements, is headed by Yuli Edelstein, who is a member of the Likud. There's lots of elements within Israel's government that not only enjoy a status quo, but actually see it as a launching pad for nationalistic aspirations. So with that, it's not as though no one's thought outside the box, but the current strongest leadership on both sides are actually shooting that down. So that's just the one thing that I'll say in response to the sort of large levels of criticism at the fact that there's no outside the box thinking. There is, and there is also, to some extent, from the oppositions on both sides, from the Palestinian Authority that has proposed this is a way that we would be willing to come in. The Israeli opposition, not as much, but theoretically, there could be. The leading actors within the current conflict do benefit from the status quo, going back to what it was. So that's part of or I would say the main part of where we're stuck.
Yeah, I think we discussed this, I think, like a year ago in terms of, Bibi, even your quote before about Smotrich, I think also applied to Bibi, in some speech, many years ago about Hamas. He obviously let money flow to Hamas, before October 7th, which was one of the big criticisms that I think, for him. What I was more referring to is it almost seems like that coalition is being splintered into two, where it seems like Bibi has become the defend the status quo person because maybe it's good for him and, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then to the right, they obviously have their other aspirations that maybe include Hamas existing in the beginning, but then at the end, it actually does include, an entire, greater Israel. Again, whether or not that greater Israel includes Gaza is still a little bit of a question mark because, for other reasons. But that's more what I'm talking about. So that, again, we're seeing levels of Israeli right-wingness never seen before, which is also a big problem, I think.
It's a process that happens on both sides. I mean, Hamas also, Hamas, some say, has been planning this. Yeah, Hamas's ideology never really changed. That said, it has accepted truces, ceasefires, long-term agreements. There was even proposals of Yahya Sinwar, the architect of October 7th, to Netanyahu to have a long-term ceasefire and stability agreement in 2018, which was rejected by Israel. And then Hamas came under heavy attack from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as from Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates within Gaza. So it's the same process happening on both sides. The idea that, the hardliners, right, as we see in the current war, the positions that are today mainstream in both sides were considered radical before, but because you're getting more and more radical on both sides, they end up being the centrist positions, so to speak. I mean, the clearest example of this is in the responses in Israel's opposition. No one in the political establishment in Israel, with the exception of Mansour Abbas, the leader of the United Arab List, no one in the Knesset actually criticized the plan. Even the opposition is considered the center left. Yair Lapid said that the press conference was very good for Israel and the plan has to be studied. Would not say that he's against this. So that is because when an idea is normalized, right, you become the fringe if you are against it. So yeah, I think the processes have happened on both sides.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, just to a little bit to respond to before, I totally, there of course are other I think radical solutions, and those obviously should also be looked into. One of the countries, I mean, Jordan obviously always comes up here. I mean, Jordan has done more to screw over the Palestinians than Israel has, from some perspective, right? I mean, first of all, they didn't give Palestinian citizenship, sort of same thing that after they annexed the contemporary West Bank for the, after 1948, Palestinians had no citizenship. There was the infamous, Black September, where they basically went around rounding up Palestinians and killing them in the thousands because they were worried the PLO was going to set up shop there. And, just continuously Jordan at every stage has, been, first in line to sort of screw the Palestinians. So even from that perspective, I guess, like, why would one even trust that, Jordan and a bunch of other Arab countries that have also done nothing to help the Palestinians, albeit not screwed them as hard as Jordan? Like, I mean, obviously the Israeli right, their hope for the West Bank is that Jordan, ends up just taking back all the Palestinians. But that's, of course, super far-fetched because, people don't realize that there's all these divisions within the Arab world itself. It also seems like, it's not as if, because the way that you're almost framing it, and I'm curious if you'd agree with this framing, is that, you actually do have this, coalition of people that are ready to rebuild and, maybe led by Jordan and Saudi, and the UAE helping there. I mean, one, I guess, is that really true? And you'll probably say yes because you just said it. But two, I mean, why would the Palestinians trust Jordan? If I were the Palestinians, I would have zero trust for them.
So I have to correct a bunch of things there. Jordan annexed the West Bank and gave all the Palestinians citizenship when it annexed the West Bank. It was called Central Palestine, and Jordan renamed it the West Bank because they saw it as part of Jordan. All Palestinians had a citizenship there. Their citizenship was revoked in 1987 because Jordan said, we are severing our claim to the West Bank. 1988, sorry. We are severing our claim to the West Bank. The West Bank belongs to Palestinians. Therefore, the people there, we are stopping to claim that they are Jordanian. Because when you annex a territory throughout most of the world, in Israel, they want to do it in a different way. When you annex a territory, when Russia annexes Crimea or areas, in Abkhazia, you immediately give the people citizenship because you say, this is mine. This is mine. So everyone there Russia went around just throwing passports at people when it annexed Crimea or when it annexed areas in Donbass in order to say this is now part of Russia. Jordan did that in the West Bank, and then when it said, you know what, we're actually rescinding our claim, that is when they rescinded citizenship in order to say you are Palestinians and should be Palestinian citizens. Similarly, what happened in Black September in 1970, Jordan ended up killing between, depending on the numbers, 2,000 and 20,000 Palestinians. It's historically inaccurate to say because they were afraid the PLO would set up shop. It is because the PLO tried to carry out a coup, assassinated the prime minister, and tried to assassinate the king. That doesn't justify the mass roundups and killings, but it wasn't also just because they were afraid the PLO might do something. Historically, Jordan has taken on the role of being the representative of the Palestinians. This was true until 1988, when Jordan said, we now recognize that the PLO is the representative of the Palestinians. Because of that, Jordan actually has played a seminal role in facilitating a lot of the Palestinians' life and in championing their cause. When it came to the Madrid Conference, for example, in 1991, and Israel refused to have Palestinian representatives, the Palestinian delegation came with Jordan because Jordan historically has been seen as the one that largely represents the Palestinians. That, as you said, there's many divisions within the Arab world, and the idea that, well, Jordan then has a majority of citizens, and they are citizens, who are Palestinian, but that doesn't mean they're the same as Palestinians in Gaza or the West Bank. Absolutely true. But Jordan is not seen as the big oppressor. In fact, Jordan is the only country in the Arab world that gave Palestinian citizenship. Lebanon, Syria, Egypt did not give all Palestinian refugees that ended up there in 1948-49 citizenship. So I would put an asterisk on Jordan being seen as the big villain in the eyes, at least, of Palestinians. And also in terms of like, Jordan has hurt Palestinians more than Israel. Possibly. I don't, it's hard to judge. What does it mean? That goes back to what we said before. Killing people versus keeping them under occupation. What is, yeah. It,
Sure.
more hurt is a relative question. Would Palestinians cooperate with a multinational Arab force? Would they recognize it as legitimate? I think it very much, again, depends on what was its purpose. If it was coming in solely in order to suppress the Hamas-led government, which, again, we view Hamas solely as a terror group, nonetheless, it is also the government in the Gaza Strip, which Israel also declared. Israel said it doesn't recognize Hamas, but whenever an attack was launched from the Gaza Strip, it said Hamas is the one in charge of the Gaza Strip for all we care. Okay, so then Hamas also runs the schools. Hamas also runs the mosques, also runs every social service, the banking system. Everything is done through Hamas. So if there's a multinational Arab coalition, if it was, practical and implemented, it would happen. If it was seen as something that was coming in solely to suppress Hamas and like rebuild and then hand Gaza back to a siege from Israel and Egypt and etc., yeah, it probably wouldn't be seen as that. If it was seen as something with a vision to the future, possibly it would be seen as something that can mature and can develop into something different. I say possibly, it's counterfactual. Don't know. A lot of it has to do with the framing. This is some of the criticism, even within the Gazan social media, sort of the leading publicists that I follow, have been saying, if the plan wasn't presented by Trump with Netanyahu, who's seen as the butcher Netanyahu for Gaza by Gazans, with Netanyahu smiling upon it, if it was actually presented as Gaza is in ruins, we're going to try to find a way to temporarily let out whoever wants to go out while it's rebuilt, that might have taken hold with the Palestinian population. So framing matters. When it's framed by Trump, who openly has no love for Muslims, framed by Trump with Netanyahu seen as their big butcher smiling upon it without a Palestinian or Arab representative there to be part of a plan, yeah, the framing very much matters. So I think, would a multinational coalition been able to assume responsibility? It really depends how it's framed and how it's
I agree. It was really stupid to have Bibi there, and also sort of irrelevant because, as you said before, Bibi is basically just a puppet. Whenever Trump is in the room, he's basically yes, whatever Trump wants. That's why he agreed to the deal. That's why he's I totally agree with you there. No, but it is interesting what you just said, that the same, or at least the Marco Rubio version of the deal, because that's the one that, at least, if this is
no, not the Marco Rubio version of the deal. Not a version of we'll expel everyone I mean, I'm saying what I saw
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
publicist in Gaza say, not a version of we'll expel everyone temporarily and say, but a publicist said if we had been given an option by a credible ally to say we are going to allow you to leave and come back as you want, but you have the option of leaving and not living in the rubble while it's rebuilt, it might have taken hold. Like that's what I say. It might have been able to convince not 2 million people because they were saying the plan of evicting 2 million people to whereabouts unknown is not that version that he's saying. But if there was an option to relocate 100,000 people temporarily who maybe have small children and don't want them growing up around unexploded bombs and have them have the possibility of come back whenever they want, he said that unto itself might have started something that we could talk about. Right now, it's not even a talking point. It's not even something that we're willing to discuss or even hear about. Like that was sort of the point. I'm just bringing that as an illustration of how
Yeah.
important framing is.
No, 100%. And I think, you know, if this deal again just falls to the wayside, which almost certainly it will, and we're going to be talking about something else in a month, whatever the Arab League might want to do, I mean, are they talking, probably not outwardly, but do you think they're talking inwardly of potentially them going to war with Hamas? I mean, are they just imagining the Hamas, because Hamas hates the PA also, right? That's also
Right.
the subtext. So if Jordan and the PA or PLO are working together, in your words, Hamas obviously, has no love for that. And so at some point, we're still looking at another conflict.
To some extent, but I mean, they're not really talking about that because again, Israel is the one that controls the Gazan borders. So, you know, the right when the war broke out, I was asked a lot, but why doesn't Egypt let Palestinians flee out of Rafah? Because Israel told Egypt, if you let the Rafah border, if you open the Rafah crossing, we will bomb it. Israel is the one that controls the Rafah land, sea, and air borders right now, factually, but even before the war, through actions.
Mhm.
Um, Therefore, right, the Arab League isn't really discussing, at least not in what I've seen, coming into the Gaza Strip with armed forces. Again, that's not something that can happen without cooperation with Israel and without some sort of deal. So the proposal was there by the different Arab states to say, let's discuss, not we have a plan ready to go. The plan can't go without it going with Israel. So I haven't seen any discussion of who's going to fight Hamas or how that's going to be, because I think
No, of course,
that's
but if Hamas, I mean, if there is in theory, a way to put much more pressure on Israel, right? If Hamas does work out a deal with the Arab League, which, I don't think is ever going to happen, but in theory, and Hamas says, hey, we're putting down our weapons and this is now de facto for the next 60 days until we figure out, future steps controlled by, the king of Jordan. At some point, Israel almost has to accept that, assuming America's somewhat on board.
okay. I don't see Israel accepting that, nor do I see America being on board, nor do I see that happening. But
Sure.
like, um, nonetheless, that's not the level of discussion. Like the level of discussion is not does someone else assume responsibility for the Gaza Strip? As far as Hamas is concerned, yeah, they're interested in someone else coming in either. Would they actively fight Egyptian or Saudi forces? I don't know. We've never seen that possibility. We haven't seen such a context, right? Hamas is established in 1988. They've never been faced with, an armed force that's not Israel. I really don't know what would
Yeah.
happen in that stage. But it's not being discussed at any level because it's also not practical unless negotiations begin between Israel and these other countries.
Sure. No, it's always, for the I guess, to make up for our lack of being able to sit in the hot tub at 10 p.m., talking about these things and just spitballing different interesting scenarios. This is very much that, not really a well thought out, policy and ethics, but just like, what about this? What about that? Very much how I function. We've been talking for a long time. You probably have to go. Just one more question that I think, we haven't really addressed at all, but I'm just curious about where is Iran in all of this in the last couple of weeks? Where are they still, just because I haven't really seen any flashy headlines with, Iran does this or says X or whatever.
So Iran is trying to calculate its moves. Iran suffered some major blows in the war. The biggest one probably being the death of Hassan Nasrallah more than the fall of Syria, and the fall of Assad, I should say, the rise of Syria, however we want to look at it. Um, because Hassan Nasrallah really was the heart of the Iranian proxy network. He admittedly was of Hezbollah in Lebanon, but he is the one who controlled the connection to the Iraqi militias. He's the one who decided that they're going to start funding the Houthis and start sending lots of supplies. Hassan Nasrallah really was not only Iran's man in Lebanon, Iran's man in the Middle East. Um, his death was a significant blow. And then the fall of the Assad regime is a second blow. The death of the former Iranian president Raisi, which happened in the helicopter crash, also weakened the regime at some point because Raisi was a reformist more within the context of Iran. And then this opened up again the questions of where are we going? Is it more reformist, more not? And like sort of the reformist side had won the elections, but then now the president is also seen as reformist, but their side is a lot weaker. And Iran is facing Trump's policies, which Trump very, very obviously would like to come to his own deal with Iran, but has to be seen as first and foremost, we're going to bully them into that. So upping the economic sanctions and all that, Iran is trying to figure out, does it try to scale back its connections to militias, its fighting with Israel, and its head to head with the United States and go to a deal, or Iran is in a very different position because of its relationship with Russia. Russia is embroiled in a very expensive war. It never expected the war with Ukraine to go on this long. Russia is the largest country in the world. It has mass amounts of population, industry, and it was out of weapons. It's out of soldiers. It is bringing in soldiers from North Korea to fight in Ukraine. It is bringing soldiers from Chechnya to fight in Ukraine, and it is buying drones and weapons from Iran. It can't actually produce them itself. This puts Iran in a different strategic place. Do we fight against Trump and I'll say differently, do we side with trying to scale things down and go to the deal with Trump, or do we more say, okay, so be it, so we will be part of the axis with Russia and we can also develop our ties to China? Iran is laying low at the present time because of that. They're waiting to see, does the war in Gaza spiral again or not, and where that's going. So yeah, you haven't been missing, but you haven't been missing much by not seeing them. They're laying low at the present time and seeing where the winds are blowing in the Middle East.
Interesting. And it also seemed like there was some talk a couple weeks ago about, people, there was some rumor that the US might actually try to strike Iran. And so I don't know if that's going into.
Very unlikely at this point, I think. But I think that Trump wants it to constantly be seen, right? I'm the madman. All bets are off. Do what I say or else.
Got it. Okay. Anything else? Big picture, small picture, medium picture?
Um, it looks like right now we're recording this on February 7th. It looks like right now the next phase of the hostage release and exchange for Palestinian prisoners is going to go through. There was some questions of if Trump and Netanyahu's announcements were going to torpedo that. Right now, it looks like it's going to go through. The main things to look at, I would say, is in a week and a half, the extension that was given to the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is expiring. And the IDF is supposed to pull out from southern Lebanon. There's been no news of the Lebanese army deploying its forces even more heavier, so not sure where that's going to go. And according to the hostage agreement, on Monday this week, it's currently Friday, on Monday that just passed, the sides were supposed to sit down in order to begin negotiations for phase two. That has not happened. That has not happened. The delegations were supposed to go to Qatar. Thus far, Netanyahu has said that he's not sending a delegation. He has stopped the head of the Shabak from being part of the delegation. He's also said the head of the Mossad is not going to go. Instead, he's only sending a delegation to discuss the technical terms of phase A. What Netanyahu wants is to get to the end of the hostage deal and extend phase A, to not renegotiate something, but to just say you can continue releasing hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. What that'll mean, though, the fact that it's not being negotiated can be seen by Hamas as a violation. Hamas has certainly violated the deal many times, but that can be seen by Hamas as an Israeli violation. What that means for the continuation of the deal, I think that's the thing to look for in the next 2 to 3
There is
weeks.
a strange, okay, you're going to kill me because there's 2 more minutes. There is a strange psychological thing with these deals because it seems like they're made vague enough that both sides can credibly say the other side is breaking it really whenever they want. And so there's always these minor infractions that at any point, if a side wants, they can point on that and sort of tank the whole deal. Is that by design? Like, does that, if me and you are making a deal, are we actually setting that up? Do we both know that's the case?
To some extent, because the idea there is to allow flexibility for when I perceive you as violating the deal, I can violate the deal back and have these things not be the make it or break it. So You did that. Okay, then I'm going to stop this for a day. Yeah, you violated, I violated. Good. We can both come back to our people and say, see, I bullied the other side into something. I don't think it's necessary by design, but I think it is just how they play out.
Amazing. Well, Alon, thank you.
Always good to see you, and to be continued.
Yeah, to be continued. Always fun playing devil's advocate for every which position.
See ya.